I ventured out this year. I left my job as the chief product officer at Dribbble to start a brand new company. And that company is gigantic. My goal is to help you master the new influential disciplines that are driving results within organizations, like product leadership taught by Ben Foster, the former CPO at Whoop. It's not just video courses. We're combining video lectures with take-home assignments and exercises, and then small group mentorship to really help level you up, and all at a cost that most companies' learning and development budget covers. So if you're interested, go to gigantic.is, that's gigantic.is, sign up for a course, and I'll walk you through everything that you need to know. And if you enroll and let me know that you heard about this on Rocketship, I've got a special discount for you.
Welcome to the Rocketship podcast. I'm Michael Sacca.
I'm Joelle Steiniger.
And I'm Matt Goldman.
And we're having 20-minute talks with entrepreneurs teaching you how to launch your product into revenue.
Check out our book at howtobuildarocketship.com to reserve your launch discount and to download a free chapter. Today, we talked with Zach Holman, one of the first engineers at GitHub. We learned about how their culture and process have changed over the years, from fewer than 10 to about 250 employees now. He details which bits of process were necessary and helped them scale, as well as which aspects of their culture they've fought successfully to defend over the years. We'd like to take a moment to thank our awesome sponsors. CodeShip makes continuous delivery simple and easy. Go to codeship.com/rocketship to get 20% off 3 months.
We'd also like to thank InVision app. InVision is by far the best prototyping and collaboration tool on the market. Go to InVision app/Rocketship to get the starter plan free for 90 days.
Customer.io is a modern email platform built for startups. Go to customer.io/Rocketship to start sending emails that convert.
Welcome to the Rocketship podcast. We're here with Zach Holman, one of the first engineering hires at GitHub. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those that may not know, give us the quick overview of GitHub.
So GitHub is a way to share code with other people. We have a bunch of tools on our website that basically help you write code with other people. If that's somebody on your open source project, or if that's someone in your small company, or if that's somebody in your large company like Microsoft, Google, Yahoo, they all end up using GitHub to help build their own product.
So you were hired at GitHub in 2010, and there was, under 10 employees then?
Yeah, it would have been the ninth.
So what was that? What did that look like in terms of kind of the work? How did you guys work then?
Man, those were fun days. My first week was the last week without an office at GitHub. At that point, I think there was probably 6 or 7 of us, 8 of us maybe, in San Francisco. But even at that point, I mean, they never really had a use for an office until my second week. And then we moved into our first tiny closet of an office. But we still kind of operated like, we didn't have this office for years after that. It was just a really fun time. It was everyone really knew each other. It was classic startup where you could, work for a little bit during the day, go out for lunch, work in the afternoon, kind of work whenever you want to work. It's exciting to work that way.
So has that changed as you guys have grown?
It's it's definitely evolved. The core is certainly the same. It's 10 in the morning right now. I'm in my PJs at home, and I probably won't get to work for another hour or two. So it's still very much flexibility in terms of your work hours. If I don't want to roll into work today at all, and I want to work really late at night tonight, which I probably will because my time zones are all crazy right now, that's still totally cool. We still do a lot of stuff through chat. We're still 2/3 remote, which ends up having a pretty big impact on your culture, how to do meetings, how to do just basically communicate with the rest of the company. So things have changed because we're 230 people now, but they've evolved in different ways while still keeping the core idea of how we work, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So how do they track, kind of like keep everyone on track moving forward?
It's a variety of different ways. Kind of the thing I like to say is, regardless of how you work, people tend to know how people work. For example, like if you're working with somebody or if you're working with me and I am just, not working, or I'm, off in la la land and not really contributing to the project, the people I work with on my team specifically will tend to know that. So it's not necessarily via some check-in process, or we don't look at your hours or anything like that. You tend to just know based on, working with people over time, like what type of code have you submitted this week, stuff like that. So it's a lot of informal controls, some formal controls. But I don't know, it works out pretty well still.
So in the case that someone's not doing something right, what happens then?
Usually it's just talking to people. A lot of cases, it's sort of been, a lot of the times with such a remote company, it can be intimidating, I guess, to try and figure out like, well, where do I fit in? I don't see your face every single day next to me in the office. So it's really just sitting down and doing a Skype interview or a Google Talk, or just talking in a chat room and just seeing, well, is there anything we can do to help you out to get through these blockers? Are you not familiar with the code that you're working on, which is definitely the case with so many different projects going on. And it's just mostly communication, trying to figure out, how can I help you in your own job go forward and build cool stuff.
Do you guys do anything unique or specific in your hiring process to find people that are, I guess, more of a self-starter type of a person?
I think so. That's a really hard quality to quantify, I guess. I mean, you can't just ask somebody like, well, are you a self-starter?
Right. So I didn't know if you guys have like an interesting way to maybe identify some of those qualities in people.
No, there's no magic to it. A lot of the times it's sort of getting a feel for somebody if they do side projects on their own. That's usually a pretty clear indicator. Or even, I don't even care about side projects necessarily. If they're a writer on the side, or if they, take an interest in, anything, that they wouldn't normally, maybe they just sit on a couch all weekend or something like that. It's a terrible categorization, but sometimes you can sort of get the feel for somebody if they would work better in a really flexible environment like ours. And it's, sometimes we mess up, sometimes prospective hires mess up and they think that they would be as successful and they just aren't. And it's not like, not everybody can really work in the fashion that we work in. That's cool. We just need to identify that kind of earlier on and, figure out ways to help both of us.
So is GitHub still structured pretty flat like it was in the early days?
We have some management now.
Gasp.
Yeah. And it takes place in a bunch of different forms. It's not strictly project managers. It's not strictly personnel managers. It sort of depends on which team you're on and what sort of things you're doing. Yeah, I don't know. It's complicated. It depends on a team by team situation, I guess.
And not too long ago, you were bootstrapped for a really long time, and then you raised a bit of money. What did that change in the company?
For one, we had a lot of money, which had a couple different implications. One was safety. And safety was kind of the biggest benefit, to be honest. And by safety, I mean, a patent troll just can't come around and just destroy our whole business because they're asking for like $2 million of money for some crappy patent or something. So there's some benefit just having a war chest for unforeseen, business things that can happen. Another benefit is we could finally build out a nice office that made sense for us. After the first office, we moved to a second office, which was cramped and, we just got too big for it. And our landlord hated us. So we finally got to a place that, we're really comfortable in. It's really big. We can, build it to our specifications. And we just feel like we're, much more comfortable settings when people come in from out of town or when I go into work and work there. So, money's helpful for that as well. And then, just more personnel and hiring as well. It's, there are benefits for being bootstrapped. There's also benefits for having a little bit more runway and specifically letting you work on really tough problems and not having to worry as much about the costs associated with them. For example, Adam is our text editor, and we've been working on that technically for, 4, 5, 6 years or something crazy like that. And over the last 2 or 3 years, it had grown to a team of 3 or 4 or something. And it was a little bit easier to just sort of say, all right, go work on this really long-term project and not feel like you have to ship arbitrarily next month, just because, we've been doing this for a long time. And it worked out. We shipped that and, we felt really good, even though we had spent a lot of years working on that technology.
This episode is brought to you by Miro. So when I was at Dribbble, over the 6 years, there was one tool that we would always use when we were doing cross-team collaboration. Whenever the collaboration started to get complex, we would bring in Miro. It made it incredibly easy to align stakeholders across regions and time zones and definitely teams with ease. And we were able to do all of that while being a completely remote team. It also has integrations into Jira, Azure, Rally, a lot of the tools that you're using already for product management and engineering. So you can import tasks from them as native cards, and it helps you see the big picture. It also helps stakeholders to understand what work needs to be done. It was incredibly valuable. And then they even have an estimation app that gives you a clear understanding of the work scope, lets you identify gaps, and then it has the ability for you to set clear expectations for delivery, especially when you're working across functions. So your first 3 Miro boards are free forever when you sign up today. Go to Miro.com/podcast. That's Miro.com/podcast.
That's such a big part of this job, is just getting stuff shipped out regularly. It's so re-energizing. You can go into these dev holes and just disappear for a while and have no feedback from anybody. And the second you push anything out, no matter how small it is, it's like a new boost.
Yeah, it's not even just for you; it's for the rest of the team as well. We had a all hands kind of summit in another city in was it July of this year, and right before that we had sort of a stop on shipping things, just because we didn't want to have support team get inundated with all this new support requests on all this new code that we had just shipped. So we kind of had like a week or two off from shipping things as people went in kind of maintenance mode and polishing mode, and then the week afterwards, everybody shipped a whole bunch of different things, and you end up with this kind of culture of like, oh man, everybody's doing all this cool stuff. I want to get mine out there. And, the last month or so has been really exciting as everyone's kind of, caught the bug and, kept shipping and shipping and shipping.
So how do you guys keep everything on track with such a big product and such a big team and so much shipping? How do you keep, is there a roadmap there, or are you just trusting?
We do have a roadmap.
Yeah.
We've been doing, we've probably taken 4 or 5 different approaches this year, even trying to figure out the best way. We started out in a repository on GitHub, trying to figure out, well, do we want to file an issue and then sort of update the issue as we go? Then we built out 1 or 2 different apps. And now we've sort of gone to a combination of the two. And we're still trying to figure out what product management means for us this year. Just because, we've gotten a lot bigger and we're trying to make ways of managing with so many people and still keeping the momentum going. We're doing fine right now, but, we're not doing as well as we used to, 3 or 4 years ago with 200 people less, obviously. So I think there's still a lot of ways to tackle that. We're still trying to figure out, but I think, heading in the right direction.
Was that the point when you really realized that you guys had to figure out a more clear way to approach it? Was it around 30 employees?
No, for me, I think there's probably a couple different places where things got really, I don't know how to describe it, flying by the seat of our pants, I guess. Right around 75 employees started to get a little bit hairy. I think in hindsight, moving from 50 to 75 employees, somewhere around there, we ended up stopping this whole idea that one person had to be involved in everything. So we started breaking up into teams. Before then, we had teams, but they're very fluid, and you'd bounce around sometimes every week to different teams, different projects. And right around 75 people, it got to the point where like, okay, we need to settle down and realize this is your project, this is what you're working on, this is your primary responsibility. And that brought with a whole bunch of different frustrations and frictions as people, didn't want to be pigeonholed into one specific perspective. So that was kind of tricky to try and, mesh with that new line of thinking. Beyond that, probably, 150, maybe 190, 170, somewhere around there. Just as it started getting just bigger. I guess that's, the whole Dunbar's number effect. When you get past that point where you can physically, most average people can't remember and have personal conversations with every single person past 130, 140. And that just became tricky because then you have to start relying upon process and start figuring out, how do we make teams? How do we make, project management guidelines that make sense in a team of 200 people, 250 people, 300, 400 people.
So there really is something to that Dunbar's number, the mythical Hacker News number?
I think so. I don't know if it's necessarily, I don't know what it is, but we just started seeing just points of friction. Like people started getting frustrated on not being able to move forward as much. And I think it comes out in a lot of different areas that you wouldn't necessarily think. Like Dunbar's number is much more people focused. Like, oh, I won't know John across the company anymore. Right. Fine. Like I don't care about John across the company because I don't deal with him on a day-to-day basis. Like it seems like a really strange thing to focus on, but the reason why people focus on is that it causes all these other things to happen. For us, a lot of the problem was, my team is forging ahead on, direction A, and we're blocked by two other teams, direction B and C. And it's more just timing and stuff. And timing is a lot easier when you have everyone, that mental model in your head and so on. So, Dunbar's number is sneaky, but in different perspectives that you don't necessarily see obviously right away.
One of the things that kind of stood out from your presentation on how GitHub no longer works was the fact that you guys are now mostly deploying internally instead of using external beta testers. At what point did that switch where you guys had the volume that you could actually source feedback from other teams?
It's a good question. We've been doing external betas probably since I started, at 10 people and stuff. We'd always have friends at GitHub that, we'd hack on stuff and see what they think. Even back then, I don't think betas were necessarily as helpful because you get a lot of, normally with betas, you think of like the typical people who like your company, like your product, but, they want to see like the newest and greatest stuff, which is fine, but they're not necessarily the best beta testers. Even our friends, they'd be like, okay, yeah, I like this, or no, this isn't that good, but they wouldn't be able to go into specifically why they like or dislike that. Right. And we just found with employees, especially in our company where we can dog food the entire product, people will go into great detail about how much we're, destroying their worldview by adding this feature to GitHub. And they end up giving us too much feedback. So that's a different problem, but it's a good problem to have. So I don't know, maybe around like 50 people or so, you start getting outside of these normal, probably for us, maybe around 50 people or so. Before that, literally everything that we made, we would use, just because that's the nature of, the product. We weren't necessarily going out on a limb and, at that point we were kind of all Ruby developers. So our line of thinking is kind of the same, but starting around, 30 to 70 people, we started hiring a lot more, Windows people who use Java in the past. And, for GitHub, that had different, software development practices. People, how they release code is different. So even earlier on, we started talking to other people and getting valuable feedback from the rest of the company because they worked in different ways. They used our product differently. And that became super helpful as well.
If you were to start GitHub again, right, and go back to 10 people, what would be the tech stack you'd use today?
Probably the same thing. We're mostly Ruby, and then when Ruby's too slow, we just write it in C or something comparable, Go or something like that. I love it. For the longest time, everyone gave us crap for writing in Ruby. It was slow and stuff, and it's like, no, we have to shell out to Git for a lot of different things. And, Git is looking at stuff on disk, which is so much slower than Ruby. Ruby's hardly ever a blocker. And, Ruby's, I love it. It's fun to code in. It's super interesting. The only difference that we've probably made over time is that we've been able to rely upon different libraries that we've written. So instead of shelling out to Git directly, we wrote libgit2, which is an open source library, mostly written in C, so it's really fast. So we can use stuff like that. And then the other thing that we sort of changed over time is that our stack became much simpler. Earlier on, we'd start using a lot more databases, a lot more different technologies and stuff. And man, now it's, we just shove everything on MySQL and use the database or, the dumbest, stupidest technologies are probably the best in the world. They're slow, they're easy to understand, and, they've been built to last.
So were you guys experimenting to find the best solution, or more of like the engineering, like curiosity?
I think it's a healthy dose of both. There's certainly stuff where, we'd start something in one database because, we got real benefit out of that. It could do a certain operation a lot faster than we would otherwise. But I think after a certain point, if you have a really popular project, you're going to have to deal with levels of scale that, just mean that you have to think about projects differently. And speed isn't necessarily, it's obviously super important, but it's way more important to make sure that you're up all the time, that you're not going down every couple of weeks, that you can quickly scale it out and, buy more machines to make it a lot easier to scale out. Turns out it's a lot easier to scale actual hardware than it is to actually, plan out on a board an elaborate, database design structure and everything with a whole bunch of moving parts. We just had one, there's a piece of technology we've been using for a while, and we're going to launch a new feature on it, which would have greatly increased our dependency on that piece of technology. And then we're kind of just like, well, MySQL has been in development for a decade or two now. So this new one has been in development for like 2 years. And It turns out that a decade of development makes it pretty robust at this point. So we just ended up switching it over to MySQL.
Interesting. Yeah. It's almost contrary to what a lot of us would like to do. Just playing with all the new stuff. But
new stuff is fun, but being up all the time is fun too. So.
Yeah.
So something that you did early on was a lot of giving talks and a lot of slide decks. Are all of the slide decks on your speaker deck account from a talk you've given, or do you just make them outside?
Yeah, they're all, talks are so stressful for me. So I don't do an actual talk unless I'm planning to give it somewhere. So,
and I don't know, your early role at GitHub or your current role was as an engineering hire, but I've seen you much more as a culture hire, in terms of spreading the way that GitHub works and the things that you do, the cool bits about the culture. I feel like it's had a huge deal to do with the way that you guys recruit. Is that a part of everyone's role at GitHub, or is that something that you just settled into?
That is definitely not a predetermined role. It's kind of strange looking back. Like I was hired on as a developer on our enterprise product. I did that for a year or two. And at that point, when I was working on what would become GitHub Enterprise, the founders were always, speaking on GitHub stuff at conferences, or not even GitHub stuff, just giving talks at conferences. And after about a year or so working at GitHub, I started getting burned out on enterprise software. Big surprise. And I started working on different projects, and I saw like the founders had sort of stopped giving public talks because they were worried about, this quickly growing company that they had to manage. And that was something that I was kind of interested in. So I started giving a few talks, definitely not about, no one will ever believe me, but I really didn't want to give talks for the purposes of recruiting. Like every time someone calls me an evangelist, like I cringe because that, it's weird. Like I talk about how we work because this stuff is super fascinating to me. Like I hated how I worked at my previous company. I loved all the people there, but I just thought they were completely insane. And part of what I wanted to talk about was I saw how GitHub worked, and it had finally gotten to the point where it really interested me. Like there was, so much flexibility, and you can work in these cool ways. There's so much reliance on chat and stuff like Hubot. And that's really why I wanted to talk about. So I ended up in this weird kind of role where I would talk about GitHub a lot and kind of be known for talking about GitHub, but it wasn't, that was a nice kind of side benefit of the talks. So it wasn't really on purpose. I kind of spent like a year or two as that kind of being my main role, just because, I like to talk about that stuff. But, I kind of, this year in particular, I've sort of gone back to being a real developer, and, instead of having to talk about doing work, I can finally do work for a while. So that's been kind of exciting too.
Well, that's awesome. So where can everyone keep up with you online? Twitter.com/Holman, or just my website, zachholman.com, or speaking.io is my site for public speaking, which I just started working on something else last night for it. So hopefully I'll do more stuff on that. Nice. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Rocketship podcast. If you haven't yet, pop open iTunes and subscribe to be notified of future episodes. We have some really great ones lined up.
And while you're there, leave us a review. We really appreciate each and every one of them.
Long days full of loud thoughts and long silence. Somewhere between living life and lying lifeless. Maybe I'm a giant under views microscopic. All eyes on me, feeling like I'm Tupac on a fucking iris. My likeness is like sneezing from infected sinus. Sick as fuck, ironic. I was born with bronchitis. And I keep it 300 like I'm that nigga Leonidas. Figures why I spit like a fucking Spartan with laryngitis. I'm just a nigga in need of some refinement. Sometimes wish I had Stevie Wonder's eyes and eyelids, cause all I see in this world, a lot of bullshit behind it. Don't believe me, ask a tombstone what Trayvon's justice is hiding. Fuck it, I'm flying, levitating to my next door, feeling out of place, big fish around the tadpole, or like some pussy niggas all around an asshole. Either way, I am the latter, something like a Gyarados. Go over niggas' heads like luggage up on a plane. Do my thought process got me higher than halos and angels. I'm in Andromeda, viewing the world from different angles. Asking myself if what I see is something I can handle. Riding my bike with no handlebars, effortlessly elevating echelons. Real shit, a degenerate who's so bizarre. I guarantee you couldn't walk far. Try modeling my shoes down the boulevard, I dare you. Typical dead, lost in the grand scheme of things. I'm a king, fuck a throne who needs a seed. When you busy running sheet, if you don't see that, you can catch a couple guillotines when you breathing that. Matter of fact, really matter, don't matter. I'm a rhyming rapper, punching rappers in the bladders. Piss off, little nigga, absolutely me and Carmack. Dopely interact, nigga, this that. 11th chap of the 10 crack commandments. Figure that, damn it. You get it? Cause it's like some new shit, and it's kinda dope. So it's like,
It's pretty eerie to know you're in a place that no human's ever been before.
This is Armchair Explorer, where the world's greatest adventurers tell their best stories from the road.
And 4 of us were swept down the side of the mountain, and then I knew there was no way out of this thing.
From the heart-pounding to the inspiring and the downright insane. Find Armchair Explorer, a part of APT Podcast Studios, wherever you get your podcasts.
Go and find what it is in the world that matches that wildness in yourself.
Hey, my name is Lovan Rumpf, and I've been working my ass off as a celebrity stylist by day and a podcast host by night. At the Low Life Podcast, it's all about keeping it real. We're talking fashion, beauty, to religion, sex, drugs, mental health. I mean, there's no topic off limits here, and vulnerability is mandatory. You can find my podcast, The Low Life, that's L-O, no W, everywhere and anywhere you listen to your podcasts. New episodes are out every Thursday. We'll see you then.